Hi everybody, I'm back for my weekly installment of telling my story, reading the book I wrote about my story. If you're new here, welcome. You can go back and watch some of my previous episodes and understand why I started this channel. The Lord led me to it and get caught up. This week, like I said, it's my father part 2. I had spoken about him a little earlier on, part 1. So, before we get started with the reading process, which helps me get on track, I just want to mention that my dad was the kind of person that I had a lot of respect for him. I admired the fact that he worked hard and tried to provide for the family. And I respect the fact that he wanted to be a good dad. I believe he wanted to be a good dad. He wanted what was best for me. Unfortunately, he and I had different views on what was best for me. I think that's true with a lot of parents. My father was not the kind of man that was born again and living for the Lord, so it was hard for him to understand that the God was calling me to a different direction. But I had to learn to see my dad as a human being, a person. Sometimes when we're kids, we don't think of our parents as being people. It wasn't until I reached adulthood that I started realizing that, and then when I had children of my own, it became ultimately clear. When I was growing up, disappointing my father was my biggest fear. So, but anyway, as we talked about in the past, he kind of gets you brought up to where we are now. He had divorced his second wife. My husband and I had moved off the family property. He was still living on the property with my sister and his grandmother that was also on the property, and my brother and his wife also was living on the property. Okay, well, in 2010, this is a bit ago, but my father got sick. He had been a lifetime smoker. I mean, he smoked since he was very young. And so he had COPD, and so he moved in to the house with us. He got sick. First, the tree fell on his mobile home. I forgot about that part. A tree fell on it. He couldn't live there. He got admitted to the hospital. He had all these issues, and so he came to live with us. His mobile home was no longer livable. Even without the tree, the living conditions were not very good in his home. He had neglected a lot of things. So in order for him to come live with us, I had to move my sons into one bedroom. So that was, kind of hard for them. And we were homeschooling at the time, so we had to do a lot of switching up. But we were trying to give him a place to live until he could find a better place to live himself, on his own. And I was happy to be able to help him, honestly. During this time, I had hoped so much that him getting the diagnosis of COPD and him facing these end-of-life decisions, I was hoping that would be an opportunity to heal our relationship, that we can make peace with each other, make a fresh start. But that is not what happened. Just like always, he only wants to place blame on everyone else for his life's conditions. He could not see where his choices put him where he was. He did not waste a minute trying to criticize me and put me down. He would leave at the crack of dawn and return at dark, late after. So all he cared about was getting his life back to normal after that big long hospital stay. And we live in a rural area. There was no internet, no cell phone signal, and no cable. So our only means of TV was through satellite. And our only means of communication was through a landline phone. Yes, some of us still live with landline phones. Anyway, he complained the whole time he was here. He complained about us living on a dirt road. He complained about our driveway, which of course I explained that for a while it was pretty rough. He complained about the fact that we got a puppy. At that time, we got a little dog because a little Pomeranian, my husband's therapist thought that it'd be a good idea for him. We had to get rid of our horses because they got to be more than he could take care of. And so his therapist thought that getting a dog would be beneficial for him, helping with stress and so on and so forth. But anyway, my dad complained the entire time about that dog being here. He complained about the air conditioner in his room. He closed off all the vents and opened the windows. And he didn't like the AC blowing in his face. And we had given him and then he complained about the heat. We gave him a fan to try to, help with that. The fact is, he ran up our electric bill. It more than doubled while he was here. He had absolutely no respect for our home whatsoever. I tried to include him in our meals. I started cooking for him and including him. I tried to make him feel at home. I tried to make him a part of our family, and he wasn't having it. He wouldn't eat when I cooked for him, so it was a waste of money for me to even try. As I mentioned, our electric bill doubled because he was on oxygen machines at this point. The home health people brought those in. He wasn't supposed to go back to work, but he was determined he was going back to work regardless. And I can understand that. He's an independent man. I wouldn't have an easy time giving up my independence either. And I tried to be respectful of that. But he didn't participate in any of the family activities that took place during that time. We had birthday parties. He wasn't here. He didn't participate. Even my brother's kids came over. And my sister's kids came over. At one time, every one of his grandchildren were here and in one place, and he was nowhere to be found. So he would get up in the middle of the night, flip lights on, 4 o'clock in the morning, his alarm clock would go off and wake my boys up. So it made it hard for them during those homeschool times. Also, Christmas and Thanksgiving. He got up as early as he could and left. He did not want to participate in Thanksgiving or Christmas with me and my children, even though he's living in our house. Thanksgiving, one of my siblings was here. My sister came. I brought extra groceries and cooked for him, like I said, and he refused to eat, but he couldn't wait to get out of the house and go eat at my brother's house. So he didn't want anything to do with us. One time I had to take my husband to the emergency room. He was having some issues, and I asked him if I could leave my sons with him while I took my husband to the emergency room. The answer was no. He would not look after my boys, his own grandchildren, while I went to the emergency room with my husband. So I had to pack them up and drag them along with me while they were bored out of their mind waiting on their dad to see the doctor and so forth. We went on vacation. We go on an annual camping trip every year, as I've mentioned. The very camping trip that he started as a family tradition, and he wouldn't watch our pet while we was gone. All he had to do was feed her and let her out of the house. We had to hire somebody to come to our house and look after our pets, even though he was living here. The worst part was he went and lied. My dad was a very prideful man. And he didn't want to make himself look bad and people to know all that was going on. I mean, we would go through a store and he'd have oxygen on. As soon as he saw what he thought was a pretty woman, he'd take that oxygen off, and walk up bold. He just could not stand the fact that he would be seen as lesser of a man. So we weren't able, he went lying to people at work and everywhere else. He didn't save any money. He was supposed to be saving up money to get his own place, a new place to live. He paid extra money to pay off some of his credit card debt. But at this time, he needed a place to live more than he needed less credit card debt. But he said it helped pay for his medicine. So I guess I could halfway understand that. My dad used to be very good at controlling his finances and managing his finances, but he had an opportunity there was a government voucher. I don't know the circumstances around it, but they was going to help him find a home to live in. But he kept looking for things that wouldn't get approved. So he could have very easily gotten a place, and they based the payments on his income. Okay, so he could have gotten a decent place to live that he could afford, and he just kept looking for excuses why he couldn't do that. I don't know, I guess some of that pride was kicking in. But things got to be stressful for my boys. And so it came to a point where I had to make a decision to do what was best for my sons. So at this point, we decided we were going to move my son back into his bedroom and move my father into our dining room. He'd still have his own space, you know. He just wouldn't be in a bedroom because my boys, like I said, it was what was best for them. So the minute we decided that we were going to move him into our dining room, at least all his stuff, we had a sofa bed he could sleep on. As soon as we did that, he moved out within 2 days. Within 2 days, he found himself a place to live, and he moved out. He bought a travel trailer, and he put it on the family land. It had always been his dream to be able to take the travel trailer down to the family vacation spot, and you know, that's just something he always wanted to do. So now he was living in one full time. Like I said, within 2 days. But then he went and told everybody at work that we kicked him out, which is not true. We just moved him out of a bedroom. He didn't care that his grandson was being put out, or both his grandsons was being put out, in order to accommodate him. Well, 3 years later, he got sick again. And I thought that it might be it. The doctors called the family all together. They told us he would not survive the night. If he survived, it would only be a couple more days. He was scared to death. He would not let me leave that ICU room. Okay? I couldn't even get up and go to the bathroom. He would freak out. He wanted me there so badly for some reasons. But we were all preparing for him to pass over at this time. And apparently, sometime during that night, he had some sort of divine encounter. Because the next morning, he was sitting up on the side of the bed, perfectly fine, like there was nothing wrong with him. The Lord stepped in and was giving him another chance to make things right with his family. At this point, he was making me all kinds of promises of how he's going to change his life, how he wanted to be more involved with his family, I thought in that moment, God did it. God stepped in. I know God did it, but for that moment, he was ready to make a change in his life and focus on the things that really mattered. And he even gave all glory to the God that he was still alive. I don't know the details of what all took place. It was a miraculous thing, I promise you. But anyway, once again, he was looking at coming back to live with us until we could get him on hospice and get him set up at his own place. Anyway, we drove back and forth to this other city. They sent him to a rehab facility. There was some kind of oxygen machine they needed to put him on, and he needed to go there for that. So I was driving back and forth. This was about an hour and a half away to get there one direction. And I would go down there and get his dirty clothes, bring them home and wash them. I ran all his errands, made sure his bills got paid. I mean, I was doing all these things, which I felt like I should do. I'm his daughter. But anyway, he was moving in with us again. I was trying to look out for him. At this point, my brother and my sister-in-law was coming into the situation they thought he was dying, so they were looking for what they could get. And I saw myself as trying to protect him because he was still with us. We let him sleep in the living room this time. He had a recliner, so honestly, it was easier for him. He could sleep in an upright position. It may not have been the best thing, but anyway, we moved his travel trailer out here onto our property, so he had access to all his belongings. His travel trailer was his closet, okay? He slept in our house, and anything he needed, we went out there and got. So the doctor wanted him on hospice, and that meant he had to leave his job. But he wasn't ready to do that. He refused to do that. He's not leaving his job. We didn't ask him to pay anything to be here. We didn't ask him for rent or nothing, okay? We did ask him to help with the electric bill one time because, like I said, it more than doubled with all his oxygen equipment and things like that. And so he did start going back to work. And once again, he was getting up at the crack of dawn. The fact that his life was fixing to change was a pipe dream. All he cared about was getting back to work. He didn't care about the relationships in his life. I was trying to look out for his best interest. I spent the whole time bragging on my brother, bragging on my brother's wife and my sister and all these things. But he treated me like dirt, okay? I rearranged my entire life, not once, but twice now, to move him into my home and make room for him. My sister said, I don't have room for you. My brother said, I don't have room for you. I made room. But anyway, that didn't seem to make much difference to him. Once again, he was going to work. He lied to people. He told his co-workers that we cut off our hot water heater so he couldn't take a shower. And that wasn't true. But that was his excuse for not taking a shower, and the reason he had some issues at work with body odor and things of that nature. He would turn off his water heater at his home. It was a way of keeping his electric bill low. He would turn it on an hour before he took a shower, and when he got done, he would turn it off again. So, based off his own personal experience, he used that as an excuse to hide the fact that he didn't want to bathe. Also, what made the situation worse is that, well, hold on. One day he called us from work, where he worked, and he said, hey, do I need to bring home anything? And honestly, I usually said no. But this time I was like, you know what, I'll help him feel useful, okay? Because my dad, like I said, is a prideful man. He wanted to pay his own way and this sort of thing. Although he didn't offer to give me any money. He did offer to buy, do we need something at home? So I asked him, well, you could bring home one loaf of bread. He went back and told people at work and griped and complained about one loaf of bread. One lady we know said I would have bought him two. But he didn't have that attitude. A family member that worked there also, it's a married-in family member on my husband's side. And she tried to stir up a lot of mess, calling us cruel and this, that, and the other. She didn't live here, didn't know nothing about what was going on. But it made a lot of problems for us. I even got cornered at the public library by a pastor's wife who was politely reprimanding me. She went on about how nice of a man my dad is, how wonderful he was, and it was the same old, same old. I started to say, well, take him home and live with you, but I didn't want to do that. He was protecting his pride. He was protecting his image. And by putting me down and telling me how to live and so on and so forth, trying to force his views on me, he played me against my siblings. Oh, he loved to do that. I guess if we was fighting with each other, then we weren't paying attention to what he was doing. I don't know. But he didn't stay here very long, thankfully. He was only here 3 months this time. The first time he was here almost a year. We returned the travel trailer to the family land where he had it set up with a power supply and all that. And so he was finally back to living on his own and working and doing all those things against doctor's advice. Which is ironic because the doctor he had at the time that told him he wasn't going to live through the night actually got sick and passed away his own self. So he then had a new doctor. Thought that was interesting. My father always saw me through the eyes of other people. He believed whatever he was told, rather than see me for who I am himself. He didn't really know me as an adult at all. He believed things about me that weren't true. He told things about me that weren't true. And I'm not trying to say I'm some wonderful person, but he went around telling people I cheated on my husband, which was absolutely not true. The reason they thought that was because when we lived in our old house, and I may have mentioned this before, there was some people across the road that was, my husband worked for a construction company, and this man had all kinds of trucks. But anyway, there was one parked in front of my house every day at lunch, and people assumed that I was cheating on my husband, when in fact that truck parked in front of my house was my husband. He would come home for lunch. He was working on a house. Matter of fact, the man that owned the construction company's house lived down the road from us. He had a mansion down the road. And so he couldn't use the facilities or anything at the mansion. So him and the work crew would get in the truck and sometimes come to our house so they could use the bathroom, have lunch, and do all those things. And I got accused of cheating on my husband, and my daddy believed it. He did not come to me and say, what's going on? He just automatically jumped into it. Make matters worse, one of those people across the street was related to somebody we went to church with, and she come back to church talking about how I was cheating on my husband. I mean, it's just unreal what people try to do to tear you down. But you know what? I never shame. I'm like, let people believe what they believe. I know the truth. The Lord knows the truth. My husband knows the truth. And so on and so forth. It wasn't no point in letting it cause problems between me and my husband or any of that. But I have never will cheat on my husband. That's just not in my belief system. I've never even thought about it. And it hurt like crazy that my dad, I mean, what other people on the street, I really don't care. But the fact that my flesh and blood father would believe that and not come to me and say, hey, what's going on? He just automatically believed it. That hurt. That hurt a lot. Anyway, there was once a conversation where he came to me and says, well, I still love you. And I'm like, that implies a lot. You know, it's like somehow I'm not deserving of it. You know, I rearranged my entire life twice for him to come live with me and my family. That don't count all those times that he left his wife years ago and came to live with me and my husband before we had kids. I mean, more than once I opened my doors to this man. But anyway, he got sick again back in 2017. And at this point, I refused to let him come live with me. He did end up having no choice but to quit his job at this point in time. His body had just gotten so weak that he had no choice. He had to quit. So he went to live with my brother and his wife at this time, and his kids. And one of the conditions that they required for him to go live with them was to prepay for his own funeral because he didn't have life insurance. My father had told me he didn't want anyone to profit off his death, so that's why he didn't have insurance. But my brother and his wife made him pay rent to live there. They made him buy food, and they made him pay the electric bill, and they had complete and total control over his money and his bank account, which when he was here, I tried to have respect for that and not take advantage of him. But my brother and his wife had no problems taking advantage of him. After getting mad at me and saying that's what I was doing, they turned around and doing it their own self. Anyway, they ended up with all my dad's 401k from his workplace, bought themselves another house. But anyway, my father lived 3 years with them roughly. He would call me and beg me, hey, let me come live with you. I'm sorry. But we were in a situation at the time when he could not come live here. As I've mentioned before, my husband and I became foster parents. And when you become foster parents, you can't move other people into your house. What was my office and craft room, sewing room, whatever, multi-purpose, my room, became a bedroom for our foster children. So I had nowhere to put him, and I couldn't anyway. They wouldn't have let me continue fostering. So he couldn't come here. So he continued on with my brother. I did go visit him a few times, but it wasn't very many times, honestly, because I didn't want to fight with him all the time. In 2020, my father had a massive stroke, and he was put in the hospital. And this was at the height of COVID. And so, due to all the hospital regulations at that time, no one was allowed to go see him in the ICU. He was all alone. He never woke up. He died alone. Only the immediate family came to the funeral, and the funeral was outdoors. There was no visitation in the funeral home. We had to meet in the parking lot. There was no open casket. My father's death was written down as COVID, but it wasn't. He, like I said, through contact over the phone with the medical staff, he had a massive stroke. And like I said, they told us what was going on, that he never woke up. So he wouldn't have known we was there, more than likely, if we could have been at the hospital. And a lot of people may not fully understand this, but I had mourned the loss of my father years before he passed. I knew he was sick, but I had mourned the loss of our relationship. The fact that when I was little, we were pretty close, and that somehow through the years, it just fell apart. So I did carry some wounds. I carried some sadness. I didn't really have any regrets, because when he was sick, I did everything I could on my part to try to heal the relationship and to make things right. I tried to be respectful in every way I could. I don't know if he fully repented. I don't know what his relationship with the Lord was at the time he passed. I don't know if he made peace with God or not. And I guess I won't know until the day comes when I pass over. I guess the biggest message that I learned from this is don't waste second chances, okay? You can't force somebody else to do anything. My motto, the only person I can change or control is me, okay? But if you're somebody out there who's at the end of your life and God is giving you a second chance, don't focus on the stuff of this world. Focus on those relationships. Do everything in your power to make the most of that second chance. You know, your family relationships matter more than anything else. More than your individual pride, more than, your independence. My father could have had more love in those last days than he'd ever known in his life from his 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 grandchildren. But he spent all that time fighting us. But anyway, that is all of my video for this week. Next week, we will be going into chapter 15, where I'm saying the battle continues. Once again, I'm almost at the end of my book, but not the end of my story, because I'm still breathing. I'm still here. My story's still being written. And I'm just praying to the Lord about where we're going to take the channel from here. But anyway, everybody have a good week, and I will talk to you next week.